as a performer, she truly listens. And I thought that really made sense to me in terms of what we do in shiatsu, because we are in some way performing. Our job is to really listen and resonate with the level of intensity, suffering, emotion, pain, but at the same time, without feeling we have to do anything about it.
I'm Rene from Leipzig, Germany, and I'm going to talk to Nick Pole today. Nick Pole from London, England. He's a shiatsu practitioner, teacher, and he is into clean language and mindfulness. And we are going to do a workshop together. He's coming to Leipzig in June next year, 23. And the title of the workshop is The Art of Trauma. And this is what we are going to talk about today. So welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Rene. The Art of Trauma is the title that seemed to fit this idea for a workshop. And for me, I would say that one of the biggest influences on how I think about what I'm doing when I'm doing body work has been not a shiatsu teacher, but a classical pianist called Mitsuko Uchida, who is Japanese, just as my shiatsu teacher was. But she brings a kind of sensibility to her work, which resonated for me and made me think. What happened, well, the first time I heard about her was reading a review, and the reviewer said, as a performer, she truly listens. And I thought that really made sense to me in terms of what we do in shiatsu, because we are in some way performing. We're moving, we're sensing, we're doing things with our hands and our bodies. But at the same time, the whole point of that performance is to listen to what's going on. The point is, if you're a classical pianist, you're playing music which is full of trauma, full of tragedy, full of feelings, that, you know, full of all kinds of emotions. But some of these emotions are very deep, very challenging emotions. And the ability of a performer, whether they're playing the music or whether they're an artist or whether they're a painter, is to be truly present with the depth of that emotion, however challenging it may be. And then, this is the creative part, we turn it into some kind of metaphor, some kind of thing that represents those raw, challenging emotions. So it kind of takes you one step away from the sense of sheer danger and trauma, one step away into something that is a metaphor, or represents through movement or imagery or words, like a poet might. And that creates a safe space, a creative space, a space where, as this reviewer said about Mitsuko Uchida's work, where we're not imposing our own ideas on what's happening there. We're just trying to listen to what's happening. So for me, if I'm doing shiatsu, I think about the music, as it were, of this person's body mind. How can I listen to what's really going on in the energy there, in the key of it?
So before we go into this space, because that's really interesting, how we create, or how you think about creating this space in which development, movement, or whatever it is, becoming aware of things happens. Let's go a step back to the question of what is trauma, because the word of trauma is kind of overused today. You hear it everywhere. And I think it needs to be defined in a way to have a deeper look at the work. So for you, in this sense of this workshop, of your work, what is trauma?
Essentially, for me, trauma is any kind of super challenging event which changes our sense or makes us lose our sense of identity, our sense of who we really are. And treating trauma, however you do it, is about recovering that sense of who am I. And yes, I agree, trauma is an overused word these days, but the thing that we're noticing more and more now in the world of therapy, especially psychotherapy, is that that trauma is an embodied thing. It's not something which we can just heal by talking about it. And so for us as body workers, that opens up a whole range of possibilities. And creative options about how we might think of ourselves as we work with a client who wants to recover their sense of self from whatever traumatic experience they've had.
Yeah. So when you say it's embodied, it's like it's kind of stuck and saved in your body, like the experience you make along the way, the conflicts you gather, the emotions that are being stuck, or how would you describe that?
Yes, the ways that the body adapts, the coping mechanisms. We have coping mechanisms in our mind to live our everyday lives and keep trauma under the radar, as it were. Or as our mutual colleague Alice Wheeldon describes it, the distortions that we create within our mind-body systems in order to navigate our way through life and live with trauma, but without actually working with the trauma, without inviting it into the space where we can mindfully be present with it in some way. So my point here is that the artist's way of being mindfully present with trauma is a creative process. And our way as body workers of being mindfully present with trauma can involve that possibility of a creative process as a performing art in some way, but not a performing art in which we are saying, hey, look, what a great performer I am.
When someone comes to you for a session with their story of trauma, of conflict, because you work a lot with people with trauma, do you kind of see it as this would translate into a performance, into an art performance?
Okay, so when someone comes to me, as you know, Renee, I like to ask some questions. I like to listen before I do any body work. I use the clean language as a way of listening. And that's the first point, I guess, at which I'm thinking of this listening as a performing art. Because the way I'm listening, there's skill to it. There's patience. There are, various qualities one needs to develop in order just to listen effectively to someone. And one of those skills in clean language is to keep my own stuff out of that person's space, to create a space which is purely for them to explore their own experience. As they begin to explore that experience, that's when the music starts, you could say. Okay. And for me as a bodywork therapist, it's like they might begin by talking in a bit of a monotone without much change of expression about what happened for them, the traumatic experience, whether it's sexual abuse or whatever it might be. But as we begin this process of real listening, their face begins to change. They begin to move. Their gestures become articulate. And in essence, their key, their energy is beginning to come into the space. And that is, you could say, the metaphor, that is the music beginning to play. However jangly or painful the music may be, it's coming into the space. the way we both work, we find where our hands are drawn. We find where that person's energy is inviting us to go next. Where is it safe to go? Where is it not safe to go? What parts do we need to avoid? And here I'm drawn to this point, and my job is to listen as carefully as I can, sensitively as I can, to what is the music in that point? What is the sound of that point? What is the energy of that point? How long does it want me to stay there, and so on?
Yeah. So so there's many ways out there to work with trauma, different kinds of trauma therapy or approaches. What for you is the advantage of taking this approach or taking this perspective, or going this way with the people you work with?
Well, I think as bodywork therapists, we have an invaluable role to play for anyone who's working their way through trauma, even if they're also working with some kind of talking therapy. As bodywork therapists, we're really going to be helping them along that path, whether or not we're using much language ourselves. In this workshop, we'll be introducing a little bit of clean language, because I find it such an incredibly opening, helpful way of being present and truly listening. But essentially, if we're not working with the body and we're trying to resolve the trauma, we're not going to get the whole job done.
Performing the art with the other person, with a story of the other person, performing this has a totally different feeling for me than to use talk or even bodywork therapy on the person to resolve a trauma, for example. So that's quite something different. Can you say something about that?
I can put my finger on a point and I can notice there's something not right there, and I can then switch into techniques to change what's happening there. But with this, I can put my finger on a point and I can be truly open to what is really happening in that point. It kind of sinks you into a deeper level of being present with the pain, the suffering, but without having to absorb that pain and suffering myself. I think that's the key thing, and it's a key skill for anyone who's working with trauma. How can we be present with it? How can we connect with it without having to absorb too much of it into our own system, and then reflecting it back in this safer way, this sort of metaphorical way, to the person, so that they can safely begin to reprocess it.
What happens to the person when you work with them in this manner?
Well, with trauma, obviously, one of the big problems is that the body shuts down. We shut down communication between the conscious mind and the embodied trauma. Two of my clients came back recently for a second session after a first session. Both of them said the same thing. They said, I'm noticing that I'm able to listen to what's going on in my body more now.
Yeah.
And that's really all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to encourage a more open conversation between the mind and the body.
When try to help people resolve their trauma?
Yes, step by step. I think that's the safest way, yes. And always in a process-based sort of way, so that you're always listening to what their body-mind system is telling you is safe. What is the next step that is safe to take? Yeah.
So you've mentioned this now a couple of times. Safe space is key in working with trauma, because people are in an alert position when they have trauma inside their bodies, inside their minds. They are alert because this was dangerous and this can be dangerous again. So this is a kind of a baseline. How do you create this safer space, this safe space?
Well, I think for all of us as therapists, obviously, we as bodywork therapists, we create that safe space by feeling safe. And I can only feel safe to the extent that I have worked on the things that make me feel scared, or they, you know, that there's something dangerous going on. And that's a truth for all kinds of therapy.
Yeah.
Because we're working with the body, it's a body-to-body thing. If my body doesn't feel grounded and reasonably comfortable, then the other person's body is going to immediately pick that up. And so this whole concept of self-regulation and co-regulation is absolutely central, whatever kind of therapy you're working with. As bodywork therapists, I think, you know, we have a bit of an edge there because, especially in something like shiatsu, we pay so much attention to being centered, grounded, aligned, and present.
So you have been mentioning the clean language a couple of times now. Can you say a little bit more about what clean language is and how that helps you work with the body and the stories and the stuff that people come with?
Well, clean language was originally developed by the New Zealander therapist David Grove, specifically to work with trauma. And what he found was important and effective was this, the inviting some kind of metaphor to come for the client. Often it was impossible or very difficult for the client to talk about the actual traumatic incident itself. But with the right kind of questions and offering the right kind of space to ask those questions in, then some kind of metaphor would arise. And he found that by asking these incredibly simple questions about that metaphor, that the layers of meaning embedded in the metaphor would gradually unfold. And that's what we do with clean language. We go into this extraordinary kind of internal landscape where a person may have some kind of surface awareness of a metaphor, like it's a hot needle in my back, or something like that, or it's a tight pain around my heart. That's the surface awareness of the metaphor. If you start to ask, is there anything else about that hot pain in your back, or where exactly is that hot needle in your back, and is there anything else about that hot needle in your back, and so on. Very simple questions asked in the right way allow a person to begin this conversation between the conscious mind and what the body's intelligence really knows about what's going on. The body's intelligence uses that metaphor as a way of asking for attention, asking, can you please come and pay some attention to what's going on in this troubled body of mine? And that's what we're doing with the clean language. We're inviting that conversation to begin. Then, for me, as a shiatsu practitioner, the conversational part is simply a way of opening up the chi, allowing that person to realize that they're already kind of giving themselves a bodywork session just by communicating with the body, bringing attention to the body. And then at some point, either I or the client will say, that's a good place to begin. You know, is that a good place to lie down and begin the bodywork session?
The touch work, okay.
So there's a natural transition between the two. There may be some talking during the bodywork, or there may be none. But after that, we come back to a little bit of debriefing at the end, so that, again, that the conscious mind can learn something about what's happened through the bodywork.
Okay, so you keep kind of this connection from the conscious mind to the body intelligence, or the body processes.
Not necessarily.
Kind of awake during the session?
No, not necessarily during the bodywork part, because that's when the conscious mind can just completely go somewhere else. You know, a person may drift into some kind of semi-conscious state, but what's happening with the energy is is kind of more free as a result to do
Mhm.
whatever it needs to do.
Okay, so that's kind of the setting for the session. Coming back to the idea of performing arts, how would you describe that when you ask questions and you get in touch with the story, the person gets in touch with their embodied experiences and maybe stuck movements, or how do you see that?
I think it comes back to what I was saying about Mitsuko Uchida, that our job is to really listen and resonate with the level of intensity, suffering, emotion, pain, but at the same time, without feeling we have to do anything about it, just being able to listen to what's going on there. I mean, she, for example, is one of the greatest interpreters of Mozart's music, and some of Mozart's music is some of the most tragic that was ever written. Just to be able to listen to what's going on there and play it.
So when you're able to listen to what's going on,
yeah,
then what happens?
Well, this idea of playing it or playing with it, and the word works in German as well as in English, spielen, or to play, is a wonderful word. And for me, it connects into the sort of Zen idea of not knowing, but being present, non-doing, but not non-doing in the sense of not making any conscious decisions about what I should be doing now, but simply playing with, like pushing hands in Tai Chi, playing with the movement that's there. And that is the performing art, if you like, the ability to be in a space of emptiness, responsive, alert, present, and ready to play.
So people don't really do anything about their trauma, or with their trauma, they are experiencing it, or having a different look at it, or how would you?
Well, for the client, that's where the creativity comes in. That the exploring the metaphor and how the metaphors change as a result of this interaction between the two of us is a fantastically creative process. That's the beauty of it, that the body is seeking ways to express itself. And one of the connections here between the art and the bodywork and the trauma is expression, self-expression. And one of the key things about trauma that, people talk about a lot nowadays is that trauma is the body's attempt to complete a process which got stuck. And so this sense of expression, allowing that creative expression in whatever way, through whatever metaphor, maybe an image, it may be it may be words, it may be movement, is essentially where the creativity is coming in.
Yeah, and this expression involves the letting go, doesn't it? So it's already an evolution of the process.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And the letting go kind of work, which you know so well from your own work with Katsugen and Seiki, yes, is fundamental to it. And in any way that's possible to invite the client to that place where they know, or their body mind knows, that a bit of letting go can happen now.
Do you think for the client, is it necessary to become to a state of being at peace with the stuff, the story that's going on when you have experienced trauma, to be able to fully experience it, to let go of things, to transform it maybe? What do you think on that?
It's like I'm handing over what goes on up here to this whole self of me, the embodied me, and finding somewhere in there the place that is at peace, always at peace. And then the more I do that, the more skilled I get at bringing that part of me into the space with whoever is not at peace, and whose body mind is seeking some form of co-regulation with the body which is feeling more at peace. Yeah. And this, it is as it is exactly it. That, I guess that's the fundamental skill of working with these things, is always to be present with it as it is.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of trauma work is about changing your state, transforming the trauma. So people come, they suffer, they come to a trauma specialist, and the specialists work with them to resolve their problem. But that also involves a lot of, working through resistance, and involves also a picture of the trauma being a bad thing, which you could easily think of, having experienced violence as being a bad thing, of course. But it's a different approach when you aim at peace.
Well, I think the approach that we have both worked on developing in our own practices is different from that. Yes, it's allowing what is present to be present, and getting that balance right between safety and danger. Everyone these days talks about creating a safe space to work with trauma. It's very important to remember that it can't be too safe if you're going to work with trauma. There has to be some danger in that space.
Well, that's interesting. Tell me more about it. Yeah. Because where's the danger? What is the potential in the danger part?
I mean, in the sense that the body is, as people often say in talking about trauma, that the body still thinks the trauma is happening. Okay. The body mind, as it were. So the nervous system is operating as if the trauma is still happening, or more frequently, as if that same trauma could happen again at any moment. Yeah. So there's this constant hyper awareness, hyper alertness. Mm-hmm. That's what I mean. And how do we invite that traumatized nervous system into the space? That means that sense of danger or potential danger needs to be coming into the space.
And you say the metaphors is kind of a connector. Would you say that? Or, connecting mind and body, but also inviting, helps like a bridge that helps the person into this space.
Yes, and the metaphor comes from the client.
That's critical. Yeah.
In all kinds of healing work, there are all kinds of metaphors that we, as teachers or practitioners, offer to our students or our clients. That's standing like a tree, or sitting like a mountain, and these are often metaphors that we offer to the client or the student. What matters in this kind of work is that the metaphor is coming from the client, and coming from the client's body mind, and being offered, if you like, to their conscious mind, and then you begin to unfold that metaphor.
So that's absolutely a key point.
Yes.
With this work, which is very special. You invite the person to develop or to show you and themselves a picture, a metaphor that comes not from the conscious mind, but kind of from the conversation with the body.
Yes, by having that creative space, by inviting them into that space of potential creativity.
Yeah. And this metaphor creates an anchor, creates a bridge into the process.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess there's, whenever you hear a writer or an artist talking about the blank page or the blank canvas, there's that sense of challenge, danger. Will I be good enough? Will this be any, that, in a way that when the artist begins a new work, there's that same connection between a safe creative space and a dangerous space. It's interesting that Mitsuko Uchida was in one of her interviews. She said, "I have to feel as though I'm risking my life every time I go on the stage."
What kind of qualities do you think a person, a coach, a facilitator, a therapist needs to create this kind of listening space, listening to this piece of art?
Because curiosity is the first step, and then openness, and yes, that's a sense of artistic appreciation, if you like. So if I'm standing in front of a beautiful painting, or I'm listening to a beautiful piece of music, I'm not creating it, I'm listening to it, I'm appreciating it. And what's a piece of art if there isn't someone to appreciate it? And that, I think, is the catalytic connection that somebody, it kind of comes back to what you were saying before about ways of working with trauma that seem challenging, or as if trauma is not the right thing. I think that sense of just simply being able to be present with what is there in an appreciative way is a real change, game changer, if you like. And a person can feel accepted. So those things of guilt and shame begin to shift. Here's somebody who can just listen to me, just accept me.
So for the upcoming workshop in June 23, on this topic of the art of trauma, who would you want to work with?
Well, obviously, I'm inviting bodywork therapists, whether they're coming from an East Asian background like Shiatsu or Tuina or Qigong, or a Western background, Feldenkrais, whatever. Anyone who's interested in helping their clients through embodied work take this journey through trauma. And especially, I guess, this is an obvious appeal to people who have some sense of creativity, some artistic connections themselves. In our culture, we tend to cut ourselves off from our creative side. You have to be a professional artist, you're a successful artist, a celebrity artist. Art is an investment these days rather than a simple cultural thing. We can cut ourselves off a lot from that, from our own creative process. And so in a sense, I'm inviting people to come back to what makes them feel at home as a creative person. And we will be doing that in the workshop. I will be asking you, if you come, to think of who inspires you as an artist, what kinds of art inspire you, how might you embody that and bring that to the way you appreciate the art that is coming to you from your client, however challenging it may be.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nick, for coming to this little interview, and we'll all see you soon.
Thanks, Renee. This is very exciting work for me, and I'm really looking forward to the workshop in June.
Okay.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.